Hi everyone, I'm delighted to open our Getting to Net Zero Holistically panel discussion with such fantastic panelists. I'd like to welcome Louise Marix Evans, Director of Quantum Strategy and Technology, formerly Senior Advisor on the Committee of Climate Change, Alex Minshull, Sustainable City and Climate Change Manager, Bristol City Council, and Sarah Longlands, Chief Executive of the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, CLES. Each of our panelists will give a short introduction about themselves and their thoughts on how we get to net zero holistically before we get to the Q&A session. The majority of this panel will be about answering questions. The questions have come from the workshop discussions, and without further ado, I would like to pass you over, bearing in mind that you'll just see Sarah as a photograph, but she is able to talk, so that's the main thing. So I'm going to pass you over to Louise, and then we'll go to Sarah, and then Alex.
Thanks, Alison. Hi, I'm Louise Marix Evans. As Alison said, I wrote the Committee on Climate Change's report, Local Authorities and the Sixth Carbon Budget in 2020. And I've been working on looking at what powers you have in local authorities in our Power Shift report for UK 100, looking at the difference between urban and rural authorities in another report for the climate, what's it called? Countryside Climate Network. They're both on the UK 100. And most recently, and getting to the point Alison asked me to talk about, I've been working on a framework to connect the national and local actions, which was one of my recommendations last year, and a recommendation of loads of reports actually that came out last year from Blueprint, which included Ashton, and from the National Audit Office as well, actually. So to think about how we holistically get to net zero, I think we need to be looking at places, which I think you're doing in this conference, how things interconnect, and I think we need a big push on government, making it easier for local authorities to act. And that's what the framework that we've put forward, which will be coming out shortly, but I can share the one-page summary with you through a link, I think. This is a framework that tries to align roles, the way you communicate, the way it's financed, and to get rid of fighting policy that undermines what you're trying to do. And then lastly, I'd say, don't get stuck too much, but everything you do, think about how it will reduce carbon and protect nature and be fair. So that's in a pot. Thanks, Alison.
And thank you, Louise. Now, so I'm aware that people can't see, we can see you, but other people can't. If we, might be easy to go to Alex, and if you just want to leave and rejoin, and we'll see if we can get you fully on the panel, that would be a good idea. So we'll go to Alex first. Alex?
Good afternoon. I'm Alex Minshull, and I'm Sustainable City and Climate Change Manager at Bristol City Council. Delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me. We've been working on climate change for a good number of years in Bristol, and our current programme, I suppose, really tries to take a holistic approach, both from looking at the whole of the city and looking at all the agencies and bodies that exist within the city. So what our mayor calls a one city approach, and seeking to ensure that it's not just the city council, it's not just community and voluntary groups, it's not just the business community, but actually it's everybody working together to deliver their contribution to that goal of net zero, and also a climate resilient city. And we're also then seeking to integrate across agendas as well. So not just deliver on net zero, but also climate resilience and the ecological emergency as well. And so we're trying to join up sort of thematically as well as within the city. But also we need to recognise that no matter how well we do that, how well we join up across the city council, however we join up across the city, we need a kind of joined up national approach as well. And the recommendations that Louise has made in her evidence to the committee and to UK 100 start to call for that coherent national approach that will create the enabling conditions that will allow us to work on it. And what we've set out when we think about our enabling conditions in our climate work, in particular, we've been talking about the democratic mandate and the engagement of citizens. We've been talking about the data and evidence. We've been talking about skills, funding, and infrastructure that are all needed to be able to deliver whatever your kind of project you're looking to implement. Thank you.
That's fantastic. And we're waiting for Sarah to come back onto the panel. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask the first question to Alex and Louise, and then we'll bring Sarah in when she can come onto the panel. So the very first question is, Jamie Driscoll said, "Don't let anyone tell you that tackling the climate emergency is bad for the economy." Do you agree? We'll start with Louise and then go on to Alex.
Yes, I do. Do you want me to say a bit more?
Yes, elaborate.
Unfortunately, I haven't memorised. I'm not someone who remembers all those wonderful numbers, which are numbers I generate as well, about how many jobs and how we'll be moving, how many jobs we need in building retrofit, for example. And I suppose I should have had a crib sheet with them all on, but I don't. But it's going to... The economy is sort of stuck in high carbon, but it's changing. So I do know about 20% of investments are now under ESG, which is environmental, social and governance kind of investment. So that's looking at more ethical, greener, lower carbon investments. So there is a big groundswell of investors sitting there, including people like Legal and General. So organisations sitting on our pension funds and sitting on big amounts of money, and this is global as well, and they want to make that move and transition into more climate friendly or lower carbon investments, and they're crying out for projects to invest in. They actually need to innovate to make it easier to get that investment. But so there is no shortage of money. Actually, there's a shortage of government money, but there's not a shortage of investor money. And we've also got a big skills shortage and people shortage, for example, in retrofit, which York were talking about on the panel this morning. Jonathan Atkinson was talking about on the panel just earlier in the second panel, second workshop. And so we need to transition jobs. There'll be sort of temporary threats if we don't plan ahead. We don't have longer term policy, and we don't embed these kinds of jobs and skills into schools and awareness of what's out there. The kind of jobs we need includes sort of environmental and land management jobs as well. So in the short term, there might be economic shocks if we haven't planned this transition, but we think about the cost of going to net zero, but that cost is also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to save money in the NHS. And it's an opportunity for businesses to get their hands on that money and to deliver. So it's an economic change, but it's not going to be bad for the economy. And that's why I'm really alarmed about the fossil fuel lobby, or this sort of new group of MPs who are called the Net Zero Scrutiny Group, who are going to pick holes in this and go, it's going to be too expensive. If we plan it right, we come up with models to enable people to access, say, electric vehicles through car clubs or through leasing, or we will get change. And we've seen things that were expensive, like solar panels, that price drops once you support that market a bit and give it a boost, create that market space for it. So I totally agree with him.
Yeah, and the cost of not doing something makes it a lot more expensive. And retrofitting is a lot more expensive than just designing new buildings with the right stuff in them. So there is that aspect as well. Okay, Alex, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So yes, of course we agree. I mean, the economy needs a functioning planet on which, and civilization within which to operate. So the economy can't operate on a 4-degree planet, and so it's a kind of fallacious proposition that it could. If we just bring that back down, though, within Bristol, we've done some analysis of the number of jobs, and it's fairly simple, I must admit, that we think decarbonisation of our territorial emissions would require, and we think it's about 100,000 person years worth of work. So that's sort of 10,000 people for 10 years. a lot of that is in the construction sector and sort of building the infrastructure and doing the retrofit that Alison just referred to, that is needed to decarbonise. And just for some sense of scale, the construction workforce of Bristol is about 8,000 people. So actually, we're talking about a huge amount of labour that's needed and activity that's needed. So, and the other thing that I think is there's an assumption that the price of things is a real thing. The price of everything is an artifice of the system that we're working in. So the cost of fossil fuels is a reflection of the subsidy and the not paying the external costs that they should be paying. So we're comparing, not necessarily comparing apples with apples and the right sort of fruit. So we can re-engineer the system to deliver economically viable low carbon outcomes. A, we have to, but B, if that's what we choose to make the system do, then the system can do that.
Yes, and I think going back to Louise's comment about transition, here in the northeast of Scotland, obviously it's going to have a huge impact on us with us being an oil and gas producing region. But we have to manage just transition. That's what's all about. It's about planning perceived performance. And you can see a lack of that in some ways coming through in relation to the fact we're going to have no gas boilers being sold new in a year or two in Scotland. But there hasn't been the same kind of skill development of, say, heat source engineer skill development. So we need to make sure that we really do plan it. And if we plan it, then it's a lot better for us. And really, it can be a lot more beneficial for our economy. And we have to do it, so we'll just get on and do it. But it's better to do it in a more planned fashion. Okay, so next question: how do we communicate, or how do you communicate what you're doing to the people? How do you get the buy-in from the people? And we'll go to Louise again first.
I get to go first, then Alex comes across as super organised. Okay. I think I would challenge the communicate to the people bit there. I think it's probably just the way the question's been written, but people are absolutely critical to this. And I think what we've seen is I think the UK net zero target is a result of people's action, and that I think that was a result of lobbying, those school strikes, to an extent Extinction Rebellion, that we saw that net zero target come in from an 80% reduction by 2050 to net zero. And we've got government get this now. I think that we've seen the Climate Assembly, which I think has really opened eyes of national policymakers into what ordinary people's attitudes to climate change are and what people want. It was absolutely brilliant process. It built on citizens' assemblies and citizens' juries that you'd already run in local authorities and local partnerships, actually. And I think running things like that, we did the Greater Manchester Green Summit in 2018, where we just asked people across Greater Manchester what they wanted from a carbon neutral green city. And they proved themselves to be real experts. And of course, people are experts in what they need locally, what they need by way of enabling. Like Alex was saying, we need this enabling environment for people to make the change. And over half the emissions we need to cut rely on either behaviour, that's about 16%, or a combination of behaviour and then technology or stuff that we are going to have to buy or start to use. So we can't have it from a top down. We've done that with the energy system sort of almost as much as we can. So people are absolutely critical and they need to be involved in that discussion. And I think what Alison was saying about planning ahead is really important. Otherwise you get that kind of backlash of, what am I going to do? I can't afford an electric vehicle. I need to change my heating, but I don't know what to do. And you get newspapers kind of campaigning for keep our gas boilers or something like that. It's really not helpful. So I think it's a sort of series of things that we need in place to have really good engagement and reassurance, I suppose, because in an uncertain world, sometimes just change, especially off the back of the pandemic, it just feels like too much for people to handle sometimes. So it's got to be done together in a sort of kind and rational way where we really listen to people.
Brilliant, thank you. Alex?
Yeah, I have to agree with Louise's initial point that sort of actually we have to listen before we do too much talking. And so in Bristol, we've been certainly trying to do that through mechanisms like the Citizens' Assembly, which we took some of the recommendations of the National Assembly and sort of then distilled them into more practical, how do we do that, and particularly around home retrofitting. And the Assembly gave us some really useful insights into that. But the other things I suppose we're trying to do is provide people with information. So we've got a website that sort of gives you choices about what you can do in your own as part of your own lifestyle and the sort of personal carbon footprints. But also then we need to inspire, and we're telling now, just commissioning some videos that will be out shortly, showing lots of people in the city doing low carbon things, and there'll be people that look like everybody in the city, that represent everybody in the city, so people will be able to see themselves, people like themselves, doing things that aren't necessarily on the face of it not being done for being low carbon necessarily, but are helping to contribute to the reduction in the city's emissions, and build the climate resilience as well. So we're trying to inform, inspire and include.
I love those 3 words. That's perfect. You put them right there at your fingertips, Alex. Very, very impressive.
That's what a couple of minutes thinking time does for you.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to do him next. Don't you worry, Louise. So basically, what we're hearing is the kind of power of stories, and that kind of like people to really relate to those stories. That's me too. I can do that, and that's what we have in Aberdeen Climate Action with our monthly climate cafe. So we take local stories, local people, local projects, and say, we're talking about circular economy. Well, here's how it happens in practice. And these people, they're just normal people, and you could do that too. So you kind of inspire by enabling people to identify. And I think also some of the stuff we're doing at the moment with communities. So we've got a space in the green zone, and at COP, one of 8 stalls. It's very small, but anyway. We're doing our community, our choices. So we've got school competition, we've got questionnaires, and we've got 12 community events where we go into the different communities. It could be a work community, it could be a religious community, it could just be a geographical community, and ask people, well, what do you want the community to look like? And not be kind of just like climate change, but look, you've got this opportunity, as Louise was saying, it's an opportunity for change. And so therefore, why don't we build the society that we want? And people were drawing stuff, writing stuff, but funny enough, it was usually quite similar, and it's the stuff that everybody knows we have to do. So I think that the public, quite a lot of them already know, and those that aren't really engaged will do once they're shown and given a mechanism to actually do it. So the money, the infrastructure, the instructions. So I think it's really powerful as local authorities to co-create with people, because once you get them into that visioning process, then you get the buy-in. So even if they don't get it exactly the way they want it, you've involved them to a point where they understand why they're not getting exactly the way they want it. And that is very, very powerful for behavioural change.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Alison. And I wonder if we might add another I to the list, which is what you've just been talking about, which is illustrating what the future looks like, and just linking the last 2 questions together. The floating wind farms off Aberdeen, are those kind of illustrating what is possible? I mean, yeah,
it's very visual because you can see it from the beach.
Okay.
But I don't know if everybody really realizes. And the issue we have, I suppose, is it's not distributive local energy. So at the moment, because the way our grid is set up, obviously nationally, it's very centralized. So people aren't getting the energy that's there on their doorstep. So it kind of disconnects, I think, Yeah. So I think that could be quite a powerful way of doing it. So when we have more ability to link into local energy and community energy sources, it makes people feel like it's theirs. There's that kind of connection in all different ways. So yeah, Cool. Okay, so I'm going to go on to question 3. We're having a bit of difficulty getting Sarah on, unfortunately, but we're hopeful that after we get to some of the questions, she might get here. So question 3 is about money. Is money a problem? Or is there now the investment ready to back innovative delivery-focused ideas? Now, you've kind of touched on this before, Louise, but I'm going to go to Alex first so he doesn't get unfair advantage of always having time to prepare.
So certainly, I think we hear that there's lots of money out there, and when we launched a prospectus for Bristol called our City Leap Energy Partnership, we said, look, we think there's an opportunity for quite a lot of activity in the city. We've now articulated that as being about the cost of decarbonisation to be about 9 billion, and within the city, and we've identified some of the opportunities where we think the City Council can be instrumental in making them happen. And we put out a prospectus to the world and said, who'd like to come and talk to us about this? 190 organisations from all around the world came and talked to us, including 4 national banks, like the Bank of Country X. And we're now in the final stages of procurement with 2 consortia, and hope to complete that in December. And certainly they would, we're seeking for £1 billion investment through that programme, and it seems like the money is real and is there, and is looking for the right projects, but getting the projects in a way that could make them investable and that make them, I think, as Alison was alluding to, that isn't just about big companies from elsewhere extracting value from places, or isn't very siloed and not delivering kind of place-based outcomes, is not necessarily easy, and something that we've been working on quite hard in Bristol to try and make sure that we get the money there, but also that value doesn't all just flow back to the investors. Actually, it creates value for the city as well as decarbonisation.
So like community wealth building, which obviously is very popular, can really see it trialled very successfully in Preston, but also in Scotland, in North Ayrshire, and lots of different areas within our own countries and abroad, particularly in Spain as well, and Valencia. I think it came from a lot of it anyway. Oh, okay. So just getting some notes about Sarah being able to contribute in the stage chat. So that's great. So she can contribute in that way. So do keep an eye on the chat. It is quite interesting because I think, oh, here she comes. Well, hey, welcome, Sarah. Well, I tell you what, Sarah, I'm just going to pass straight to you to introduce yourself, and you can come in on the last question about money, because that's your area, really, isn't it?
Hi, yeah, and I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get in. I don't know, the system was just throwing me out all the time, but delighted to be here. Very briefly, CLES is the Centre for Local Economic Strategies. We're based in Manchester, and our work is all about creating better economies, generative economies, which really work for people, place and planet. And we work with local authorities across the UK, thinking about better ways to do economic development, and particularly the role of community wealth building. So just on the question about, is money a problem? I mean, obviously, local authorities have been kind of under the cosh for at least the last 10 years in terms of the austerity agenda. So, I mean, I guess it would be remiss of me not to suggest that money isn't a problem. I think it has been. But having said that, I think it's about how we use the money that we have already got and the assets that we already have in our localities to progress this agenda. And I think there's masses that local authorities can do in terms of their procurement and spending power, and not just their own power, but how they could work with other public and private organisations in their locality to really use their spending power to prioritise net zero technology and help to build and give confidence to the market. But also in terms of workforce development, how can local authorities and their partner organisations in the NHS, in other parts of the public sector, use that their workforce strategy to build the skills and to develop the training necessary so that people can start to move into some of the net zero technologies. For example, retrofit and community energy, that's already been mentioned, I think are 2 really, really obvious examples. But, there is a real opportunity to using what we already have and just reshape it to link up with this agenda.
Before we move on to Louise, I've got a question for you, Sarah. Obviously, Alex was saying about the difficulty about using local firms because of the lack of size, in effect. To what extent how you find the successful models for bringing lots of small companies together from an area and doing kind of group contracting kind of exercise.
Yeah, so like you mean like a sort of consortia bidding for bigger contracts? Well, I think there's two issues there. One is, why are those contracts so huge? So are there options to disaggregate those contracts into smaller bite-sized chunks, which make it easier for companies to bid for? Now, sometimes you get the argument, oh, well, that's much more inefficient, or that's much more work for the council. And my response would be, well, you know, is it important that we are involving local companies and local people in these contracts, or is it not, basically? And what is the cost of unemployment for a local area? So I think that would be my response to that. So there's an issue about the size of those contracts in the first place. If contracts need to be large, well, then yes, there should be support to local businesses, local social enterprise, whoever it happens to be, whoever's got the skills to do this work, support to enable them to get information about the contracts in the first place, because sometimes the market fails to actually give people information in the first place. So how could they ever have a hope of bidding for it? So making sure they've got the information, and second of all, what can be done to support those consortia to develop, whether that's about open day events with the procurement team to find out about the project and to encourage people to work together, or whether it's business support as part of the business support process, making sure that businesses know how to develop and create those types of consortia, and also using existing business forums as well, like chambers of commerce and so on. So yeah, I'm definitely supportive of the idea of consortia, and I think it's worked pretty well in some areas.
Fantastic, thank you. Louise?
Yeah, I suppose the money question is there's different kinds of money, isn't there? So there's lots of money. There's 27 billion quid to spend on roads, apparently. So there's quite a lot there. But then it's very hard for areas to build a business case using the Green Book, to build a case for a particular bus route or for cycling infrastructure. So it depends who's got the money and what criteria it's being judged on as to whether you can lay your hands on it and how you're allowed to spend it. Certainly, yeah, like Sarah said, the council cuts have been terrible over the years, and the COVID pandemic has hit them and left them even shorter. And the problem with that is then that can affect things like what Alex was talking about, is that pipeline, that energy and expertise and time to develop the pipeline of projects that then become investable. So we get money for innovation, but that often doesn't develop an actual workable business model, because it was so funded, you can't see through it as to whether there's a standalone business model that is investable. So these are things where we come back to the planning thing as well, of how are we planning this pipeline of different technologies, different service offers? And we heard from Jonathan, we did a lot of work on service delivery to develop people-powered retrofit to make it easy for people to go through so that they can spend their money on retrofitting their home. So it's that pump priming money, that at-risk development money that some people don't want to spend, or that if you borrow it, it's very expensive. So working through all this, how the money gets spent and divided up, and how that pipeline, and really understanding. I challenged someone the other day who was talking about all this money and said, well, the investment industry wants big projects, 20 million quid at a go, because they don't want to work with lots of silly little projects. Well, they're going to have to, and they do that through the mortgage market. So they are going to have to innovate as well, because if we haven't got one size fits all and we want to spread this around so that we can do lots of different solutions, the investment market has to change as well, I think. So, yeah. Oh, lastly, preventative spending. We're not very good at that. Spending on one thing which gives a benefit somewhere else in the system is really hard to justify. So some kind of, people are looking at this impact investment, carbon offsetting is a form of that. Again, it's complicated and we need to find a way to do it.
Just one last question to answer quite quickly, and I'll go to Sarah first. Do you think that the whole kind of framing of net zero is putting action on climate change at risk?
So I'm guessing what we mean by that is because it's so kind of overwhelmingly, it's such a massive challenge that it almost feels like it sort of disables. Is that kind of what we're thinking, Alison?
Well, it's either that or the fact that we're talking about the wording of net zero, so that there can be like offsetting as opposed to real action, I think, as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, I would argue that the climate crisis is so serious now that we just need to kind of get on with it, really. And if we're going, I don't think the net zero is the problem. I think, or the language, if you like. I think the problem is just political inertia, and I think the problem is that people just don't have the tools or the language available to be able to just make progress quickly or to see where progress can happen. And I think there's also a sense of confidence about, we can't do anything because we've got a procurement legislation or we've got a lack of funding or whatever. And I think we just need to kind of build a confidence and give people a sense that we can do stuff. There is things possible and people are getting on with it. I think we just need action, really, because it's just getting to a point where if we don't, then we're not going to have a planet to live on. So what's the choice, really? Sorry to be so dismal, but
it's all about action, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think as well, just having a go, just try something, try to do something, anything. Just this is too serious now, and we can't let stuff like the language get in the way. We just got to try stuff out and get on with it.
No, totally. No, it is about that. And I think that came across very clearly in the workshops. This need to just try things, make quick mistakes and move on to the next one. And don't be scared to make those mistakes because it's all learning and data at the end of the day. Alex, do you want to come on quickly and add to that?
I can see those risks. We tend not to use net zero or climate neutral much beyond the inner circle of people who are talking about it, and we talk about climate change. And for me, it's not how we achieve the last 10% or 20%, but it's how we achieve the next 10 or 20%. That's what matters, and how quickly we do that.
Great. Louise, want to come in?
Absolutely. I think if you spend too long looking at how you'll do the net part, you're missing the fact that we need to stop using fossil fuel powered vehicles. We will need to stop installing gas boilers. We need to make sure that by 2030, everything people decide and invest on is not emitting carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. So it's driving that out. The netty part can really help us drive some cash into making afforestation, tree planting, low carbon land use. It can push money in the right direction, and I think that's useful. But you can't rely on that, because that offset part will be used for aviation and difficult industry. It's not going to be okay to use for my house or my transport. So I think having a quick exit strategy from the net, that part, possibly even then, how do we go into maybe carbon negativity in the long run, is how we need to be thinking ahead. So there's a slight danger there, but I think it showed in the CCC modelling that we can get there by 2050, and they sort of balanced it all out.
No, it is. It's totally possible, but it's only possible if we act now, isn't it? It's that urgency issue. Well, listen, thank you so much. It's been a fantastic panel. Thank you, Louise, Alex and Sarah, for all your contributions. And what we're going to do now is just close off the panel, and then I'll come on and do some closing words. Thank you.